Aliens were failing the war. Then the humans arrived. The emergency siren screamed through the command center of Station Ethan Prime. Commander Thelris stood before the holographic display, watching another colony world die. The planet's surface glowed red as the Vorn swarm consumed everything in their path. Billions of lives winked out in moments. How long until they reached the core worlds? Thelris asked, though he already knew the answer. 3 weeks, Commander. Maybe 4 if we're lucky, replied his tactical officer, a young Quartzan whose crystalline body pulsed with anxious blue light. Thelris closed his eyes and reached out with his telepathic senses. He could feel the terror of his people across dozens of worlds. The Aetheri had been the first species to achieve faster-than-light travel nearly 10,000 years ago. They had built the Galactic Coalition, bringing together hundreds of species in peace and prosperity. Now all of that was ending. The Vorn swarm had appeared 5 years ago from beyond the galactic rim. At first, the Coalition thought they could negotiate. The Vorn were clearly intelligent, with sophisticated biotechnology and organized tactics. But the swarm had no interest in peace. They consumed everything: planets, resources, and entire populations. They were a hive mind, billions of creatures acting as one vast intelligence with a single purpose: expansion. The Coalition's first response had been diplomatic. When that failed, they sent their fleets. The battles had been spectacular disasters. The swarm adapted to every weapon the Coalition used. Energy beams that vaporized swarm ships on Monday were absorbed and redirected by Tuesday. Psychic attacks that confused the hive mind for a few hours were countered by Wednesday. The swarm learned, evolved, and came back stronger. Thelris walked through the command center past officers from a dozen different species. The amphibious Kelvar monitored fleet movements with their 3 eyes. The insectoid Thrax managed communications with clicking mandibles. The towering Gorath analyzed tactical data with their 4 arms working multiple consoles simultaneously. All of them looked exhausted and defeated. "Commander, the High Council is requesting your presence," an aide announced. Thelris took a transport ship to the Coalition's capital world of Sanctuary. The planet had been named 5,000 years ago as a symbol of hope and safety. Now it was just another target on the swarm's path. The government complex rose like a crystal mountain from the planet's blue oceans. Inside, representatives from every member species gathered in desperate discussion. High Counselor Vena, an ancient Aetheri with silver skin and wise eyes, addressed the assembly. "My friends, we must face the truth. We are losing this war. Our fleets are reduced to 30% strength. We have lost 62 colony worlds and 17 homeworlds. The swarm advances faster than we can retreat." Angry voices erupted from the assembly. Some demanded more aggressive tactics. Others insisted on evacuation to unexplored regions of space. A few even suggested surrender, though everyone knew the swarm took no prisoners. "There is one option we have not tried," Vena continued, raising her hand for silence. "The ancient protocols allow us to seek aid from uncontacted species in times of existential crisis." "Primitives?" scoffed a Gorath representative. "What could they possibly offer? We have the most advanced technology in the galaxy, and it has done nothing." "Perhaps that is precisely the problem," Vena said quietly. "We have fought this war using 10,000 years of civilized military doctrine. We target only military assets. We avoid collateral damage. We follow rules of engagement written in times of peace. The swarm has no such limitations." Thelris stood. "What are you suggesting, Counselor?" "Our scouts have detected a species that recently achieved faster-than-light capability. They call themselves humans from a world they name Earth. They are remarkably primitive by our standards, still using chemical propulsion, kinetic weapons, and actual physical currency. But our anthropologists have studied their broadcasts and historical databases." Vena paused, and Thelris saw something in her eyes he had never seen before: fear. "These humans have been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. They have committed atrocities we cannot even imagine. They have nearly destroyed their own world multiple times. And you want to bring these violent primitives here?" a Kelvar admiral demanded. "I want to survive," Vena replied. "The swarm adapts to technology and logical tactics. Perhaps what we need is something unpredictable, something the swarm has never encountered, something desperate and dangerous enough to fight the way they do." The vote was close, but desperation won. The Coalition would send a delegation to Earth. Thelris volunteered to lead the mission. He took a small diplomatic ship with a crew of 5. The journey to Earth took 6 days through Coalition space and another 3 through uncharted regions. As they approached the small blue and green planet, their sensors detected thousands of satellites, orbital platforms, and what appeared to be weapon systems pointed at space. "They are afraid of us," noted Kessa, the Kelvar pilot. "Or they are ready to fight," Thelris corrected. They broadcast on all frequencies, transmitting the Coalition's first contact protocols. Within minutes, they received a response in dozens of languages. The humans were arguing among themselves about how to respond. Their communications channels a chaotic mess of different voices and opinions. Finally, a unified message came through, unidentified vessel. "This is the United Earth Defense Force. Reduce velocity and prepare to be escorted to orbital station. Any aggressive action will be met with force." The escort consisted of 6 primitive spacecraft, bristling with missile tubes and kinetic cannons. Crude but effective if you wanted to destroy rather than disable. Thelris felt a chill run down his spine. These were not ships designed for exploration or science. These were weapons, pure and simple. The human space station was a spinning wheel of metal and composites. Nothing like the elegant bioorganic stations of the Coalition. Everything looked industrial, functional, designed to be repaired and rebuilt quickly. War machinery. They were met by a delegation of humans in military uniforms. The leader, a woman with short dark hair and sharp eyes, introduced herself as General Sarah Chen. She did not smile or offer the friendly gestures the Coalition had observed in human entertainment broadcasts. "You have exactly 1 hour to explain why we shouldn't consider you a threat," General Chen said. Thelris explained everything. The Coalition, the swarm, the losing war, the billions already dead and the trillions more who would die if the swarm was not stopped. He shared tactical data, holographic recordings of battles, and the grim mathematics that showed the Coalition would fall within a month. The human delegation listened in silence. When Thelris finished, a long moment passed. "So let me get this straight," said a human male with gray hair and numerous medals on his uniform. "You're a coalition of hundreds of advanced alien species with technology we can barely understand. And you're losing a war to space bugs. Now you want our help because we're violent and unpredictable?" "Yes," Thelris said simply. "I know how it sounds." General Chen looked at her colleagues. They communicated with subtle gestures and expressions that Thelris could not read with his telepathy. These humans had strong mental shields he had not expected from such a young species. "Give us 24 hours, General Chen finally said. "We need to discuss this with our world leaders." Thelris and his crew waited in orbit, watching Earth turn below them. He could sense millions of minds down there, all burning with emotions he found difficult to interpret. Fear, certainly, but also excitement, curiosity, and something else that disturbed him deeply: eagerness. When the humans returned, General Chen's expression was grim. "We'll help you, but we have conditions. We need full access to your technology databases, protection for Earth if we fail, and a seat on your High Council if we succeed." "Agreed," Thelris said without hesitation. The Council would not like it, but they were not in a position to negotiate. "Then we have a deal." General Chen extended her hand, and Thelris took it, feeling the strange human custom of a handshake. Her grip was firm, strong, and her skin was warm compared to his own. "How soon can your forces deploy?" Thelris asked. "The 1st Battalion leaves in 48 hours, General Chen replied. "I hope you're ready for this, Commander. Because once we start fighting, we don't do it halfway. Humans don't quit and we don't surrender. We win, or we die trying." As Thelris prepared to return to Coalition space with humanity's first warriors, he wondered if he had just saved the galaxy or doomed it to something worse than the swarm. Only time would tell. Aliens were failing the war. Then the humans arrived. The human transport ships arrived at Station Ethon Prime 3 days later. Thelris watched them approach with mixed feelings. The vessels were blocky and inelegant, covered in armor plating and point defense weapons. They looked like flying fortresses rather than the sleek Coalition ships designed for speed and efficiency. Colonel Marcus Webb was the first human to step off the transport. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with scars on his face and hands that spoke of previous battles. Behind him came 500 human soldiers, all wearing camouflaged armor and carrying weapons that looked ancient compared to Coalition energy rifles. "Permission to come aboard?" "Commander?" Colonel Webb said with a crisp salute. Granted, Thelris replied, trying to mimic the gesture. Welcome to the front lines. Webb looked around the pristine corridors of the station, noting the peaceful artwork and comfortable furniture. This is a military installation? Yes, is something wrong? No gardens or meditation rooms on our combat stations, Webb said. Just bunks, armories, and medical bays. Different philosophies, I suppose. Thelris led the humans to the command center where Coalition officers waited. The contrast was startling. Coalition personnel wore elegant uniforms in various colors denoting their species and rank. The humans all wore the same dull green and brown, practical and identical. Coalition officers carried data tablets and communication devices. The humans carried knives and sidearms even here, in what should be a safe zone. This is our tactical situation, Thelris began, activating the holographic display. It showed the swarm's positions in red, spreading like a disease across Coalition space. We have lost every major engagement in the past 6 months. The swarm adapts to our weapons within days. Our energy weapons are now useless. Our psychic attacks have been countered. Even our tactical viruses are detected and neutralized. A human officer raised her hand. What about kinetic weapons? Mass drivers, railguns, good old-fashioned bullets. The Quartzan tactical officer's crystalline body flashed with amusement. We abandoned such primitive technology 3,000 years ago. They are inefficient and limited in range. But has the swarm encountered them recently? The human pressed. Silence fell over the command center. The Coalition officers looked at each other, realization dawning. They had been fighting with increasingly advanced technology, trying to out-evolve the swarm. They had never considered regression. No, Thelris admitted. The swarm has only faced modern weaponry. Colonel Webb smiled. It was not a friendly expression. Then they're in for a surprise. The briefing continued for hours. The humans asked strange questions. How did the swarm communicate? What was their supply chain? Did they take prisoners? What were their psychological weaknesses? The Coalition officers struggled to answer. They had spent years analyzing the swarm's technology but had never considered these other factors. You're thinking about this all wrong, Webb finally said. You're treating this like a war between nations. Rules of engagement. Targeting only military assets, trying to minimize casualties. That's not what this is. This is extermination, them or us. You need to fight like it. We are not barbarians, a Gorath admiral said coldly. Neither are we, Webb replied. But we're survivors. We've spent 10,000 years fighting wars on our own planet. Wars of conquest, wars of survival, wars of ideology. We've made every mistake you can make in warfare. And we've learned from them. Sometimes the only way to beat a monster is to become something worse. Thelris felt uncomfortable with the humans' words, but he could not deny their logic. The Coalition had built their civilization on principles of peace and cooperation. They had no experience with total war, with fighting an enemy that wanted nothing less than complete annihilation. What do you propose? Thelris asked. Webb pulled up a map of the front lines. First, we need to understand that the swarm is only adapting to what you show them. They've learned to counter energy weapons because that's all you've used. We hit them with kinetics, bullets, missiles, physical projectiles. Old technology. While they're adapting to that, we introduce chemical weapons, biological agents, computer viruses designed for their organic networks. We keep changing tactics before they can adapt. Chemical weapons are banned under Coalition law, a Kelvar officer protested. Are you still planning to follow peacetime laws? A human captain asked. Because the swarm sure isn't. The truth was harsh but undeniable. The Coalition had been fighting with one hand tied behind their back, constrained by laws and ethics developed during centuries of peace. The swarm had no such limitations. General Chen arrived the next day with additional forces and began working with Coalition military leaders. At first, the meetings were tense. Coalition officers found human tactics brutal and wasteful. The humans found Coalition doctrine naive and inflexible, but gradually, understanding began to develop. Show me how you conduct a planetary defense, General Chen requested. The Coalition officers demonstrated their standard protocol. Orbital platforms with overlapping fields of fire, shield generators protecting civilian centers, military forces positioned in clear defensive lines. Everything organized, efficient, and predictable. That's your problem right there, Chen said. The swarm knows exactly what you're going to do because you always do the same thing. You need randomness, chaos, unpredictability. But that would be inefficient, argued a tactical officer. Efficiency doesn't matter if you're dead, Chen replied. Let me show you something from Earth's history. She pulled up records of human battles. The Coalition officers watched in horror and fascination. Humans using guerrilla tactics, hiding among civilians, feigning retreats only to ambush pursuers, setting traps that killed their own people to eliminate more enemies, destroying their own infrastructure to deny it to invaders. Tactics that no Coalition species had ever considered. This is madness, Thelris whispered. This is survival, Chen corrected. You've been playing by rules the swarm doesn't follow. You've been fighting to win. We fight to survive. There's a difference. Training began immediately. Human soldiers taught Coalition forces close-quarters combat. The concept of hand-to-hand fighting was foreign to most Coalition species. Why would you ever let an enemy get that close? But the humans insisted. When weapons fail, when shields collapse, when technology breaks down, you need to know how to fight with your bare hands. The Aetheri learned knife fighting. The Quartzen practiced using their crystalline bodies as weapons. The Kelvar discovered their aquatic biology, gave them advantages in grappling techniques. Even the scholarly Thrax learned to use their mandibles as weapons rather than just tools for communication. Weapons training was equally transformative. Coalition soldiers had used energy weapons for so long that they had forgotten the principles of ballistic trajectories, bullet drop, and wind resistance. The humans brought crates of their primitive firearms, rifles, shotguns, pistols, and enormous machine guns. The weapons were loud, smelly, and required constant maintenance. They were also brutally effective. These weapons don't just kill, Webb explained during a demonstration. They terrify. The sound, the impact, the way a target physically reacts. It's psychological warfare as much as physical. But the biggest change was in mindset. Coalition forces had been taught to value every life, to minimize casualties, to fight cleanly. The humans taught them something different. Sometimes you had to sacrifice to win. Sometimes you had to make the enemy fear you more than they feared death. Sometimes you had to be willing to do terrible things to prevent something worse. A week into training, the swarm attacked a nearby system. It was a minor colony, only a few million inhabitants, but it was also a test. Thelris gave Colonel Webb permission to respond with a human task force. The Coalition fleet set up traditional defensive positions around the colony. The human ships did something unexpected. They charged directly at the swarm fleet, firing kinetic weapons at close range. The swarm had never encountered such aggression. They tried to adapt, but the humans kept changing tactics. They used their ships as battering rams. They detonated nuclear weapons at point-blank range, sacrificing their own vessels to destroy multiple swarm ships. On the ground, human special forces infiltrated swarm-controlled areas. They poisoned the organic structures the swarm used for coordination. They planted explosives in hive clusters. They even captured live swarm creatures and released them infected with diseases designed to attack the hive mind. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, the swarm had been driven back for the first time in months. The colony was saved, though the cost was heavy. 60% of the human task force had been killed or wounded. Thelris found Colonel Webb in the medical bay getting his broken arm set. Your losses were catastrophic. I am sorry. Webb looked surprised. Catastrophic? We won, didn't we? Lost 300 soldiers to save 3 million civilians. That's not catastrophic, Commander. That's acceptable. The casual acceptance of death shocked Thelris, but he was beginning to understand. Humans had a different relationship with mortality than Coalition species. They lived shorter lives and expected to lose people they cared about. Death was not an unthinkable tragedy, but an accepted part of their existence. It made them dangerous in ways the Coalition could never. Aliens were failing the war. Then the humans arrived. Station Praxis 7 hung in the darkness like a dying star. Once home to 50,000 Coalition personnel, it now sheltered barely 10,000 survivors. The swarm had been attacking for 3 days straight, wearing down defenses with relentless waves of bioships and boarding parties. The station's commander, a veteran Gorath named Krell, had already drafted evacuation orders. It was only a matter of time before the station fell. Then the humans arrived. Colonel Webb's transport docked on the western arm of the station with 500 soldiers and enough weapons to start a small war. Thelris met them at the airlock, expecting to coordinate a defensive withdrawal. Webb had other ideas. We're not retreating, Webb announced. We're attacking. Krell's forearms gestured in confusion. Attacking? The swarm has us surrounded by 3 battle groups. Our shields are at 30%. We have maybe 6 hours before they breach the hull. Then we better move fast, Webb said, already striding toward the command center. His soldiers followed, their heavy boots echoing through corridors designed for quiet efficiency. The command center was chaos. Alarms blared. Holographic displays showed swarm forces tightening their grip. Coalition personnel ran between stations, trying to manage a dozen crises at once. Webb took one look at the scene and whistled sharply. Every human soldier stopped and turned to face him. Lieutenant Harris, take 1st and 2nd platoons. Secure the docking bays and prep for offensive deployment. Captain Rodriguez, 3rd and 4th platoons on you. I want breaching charges on every exterior bulkhead facing swarm positions. Lieutenant Kim, 5th platoon sets up heavy weapons here, and here. Webb pointed to positions on the tactical map. If they breach, we turn this station into a meat grinder. The humans moved with practiced efficiency. No questions, no debate, just immediate action. Coalition personnel watched in bewilderment. What are you doing? Thelris asked. We should be preparing evacuation ships. Evacuation is how you lose wars, Webb replied. You give ground once and you keep giving it. The swarm has you trained to run. Time to train them that attacking humans has consequences. 2 hours later, the swarm launched their largest assault yet. 3 massive bioships attached themselves to the station's hull, disgorging thousands of warrior form creatures. These were not mindless drones but specialized killing machines, each the size of a human. With blade arms that could slice through steel and acid sacs that dissolved metal, the coalition defenders fell back as they had been trained, trying to establish a defensive perimeter. The swarm flooded through breached sections, overwhelming everything in their path. It looked like the end. Then the humans sprang their trap. Lieutenant Rodriguez detonated the breaching charges Webb had ordered placed along the station's hull. Entire sections of the station blew outward into space, taking hundreds of swarm creatures with them. The explosive decompression created zones of vacuum that coalition forces had abandoned, but the swarm was now trapped within. Simultaneously, human soldiers wearing sealed combat suits emerged from hiding positions and attacked the confused swarm forces from behind. They used flamethrowers that the swarm had never encountered, weapons that every coalition species had banned as unnecessarily cruel. The swarm creatures burned, their organic armor providing no protection against temperatures that could melt steel. In the docking bays, Lieutenant Harris launched the most audacious part of the plan. Human forces boarded small assault shuttles and flew directly at the swarm bioships attached to the station, not to dogfight them but to physically board them. The shuttles punched through the bioships' outer membranes and human soldiers poured inside, fighting hand-to-hand with swarm drones in the creatures' own bodies. Thelris watched the tactical display in disbelief. This is insanity. They will all be killed. Maybe, Webb agreed, but they'll take a lot of the enemy with them, and the swarm will learn that attacking us costs more than it's worth. The battle raged for 4 hours. The humans fought with a savagery the coalition had never witnessed. When their rifles ran out of ammunition, they used pistols. When the pistols were empty, they drew knives. When the knives broke, they used their bare hands and teeth. They turned every corridor into an ambush point, every room into a killing field. The swarm adapted quickly. They began to counter the flamethrowers, their organisms developing heat-resistant shells within minutes. But the humans switched tactics before the adaptation was complete. They introduced biological weapons, releasing engineered viruses into the station's atmosphere that targeted the swarm's organic structure. The viruses made the creatures sluggish and confused. When the swarm adapted to the virus, the humans changed again. This time they used sound weapons, ultrasonic frequencies that disrupted the swarm's communication protocols. The hive mind lost cohesion. Individual creatures began acting independently, which made them vulnerable to coordinated strikes. Coalition forces, watching the humans fight, began to understand. This was not about using superior technology. This was about being unpredictable, about changing tactics faster than the enemy could adapt, about being willing to try anything regardless of how desperate or dangerous it seemed. Captain Senna, an Aetheri squad leader, made a decision. She had been falling back as ordered, but now she stopped. She ordered her soldiers to hold their position and fight. When swarm creatures rushed their position, she did something no Aetheri had done in recorded history. She drew her combat knife and charged into melee combat. Her soldiers followed. The Aetheri were not strong fighters, but they had telepathic abilities the humans lacked. Senna reached out with her mind and sensed the emotional states of the swarm creatures around her. They felt no fear, no pain. But they did feel surprise when prey fought back ferociously. She shared this information with nearby human units, creating a combined arms approach that multiplied the effectiveness of both forces. The tide began to turn. What had seemed like certain defeat became a desperate stalemate, then slowly became something that looked like victory. The swarm forces, confused by tactics they had never encountered, began to withdraw. Their bioships detached from the station and retreated into the darkness. When the fighting ended, Station Praxis 7 was a wreck. Entire sections were exposed to space. Bodies of both defenders and swarm creatures filled the corridors. The station's infrastructure was so damaged it would take months to repair. But it was still standing and the swarm was gone. Colonel Webb found Thelris in the command center, surveying the damage. The human had blood on his armor and a bandage covering a wound on his head. "Your casualties?" Thelris asked. 217 dead, 94 wounded seriously enough to need evacuation, Webb replied. Could have been worse. 40% casualties, and the human thought it could have been worse. Thelris tried to wrap his mind around that perspective. To the Coalition, losing even 10% of a force was catastrophic. To the humans, it was acceptable if the mission succeeded. "You saved the station," Thelris said. "You saved all of us." Webb shook his head. "We showed the swarm something new. That's all. Next time they'll be ready for what we did today. We'll need to come up with new tricks. How can you possibly keep ahead of them? Because humans have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. We've got 10,000 years of tricks to try. Every battle in our history, every tactic, every strategy. The swarm adapts fast, but we've got a bigger playbook than they can imagine." Word of the victory at Praxis 7 spread through Coalition forces like wildfire. For the first time since the war began, defenders had not just survived but actively defeated a major swarm assault. Morale soared. Recruitment increased. Coalition soldiers requested human trainers. More importantly, the strategic situation began to shift. The swarm had been advancing steadily because they knew Coalition forces would retreat. Now they had to recalculate. Attacking might cost more than it gained. Hesitation crept into their assault patterns. General Chen arrived at Praxis 7 a day after the battle with additional forces and supplies. She toured the damaged station with Thelris and Webb, noting everything. "This is good," she said, "but it's just one battle. We need to start thinking bigger." "What did you have in mind?" Thelris asked. "Offensive operations. The Coalition has been on defense for 5 years. The swarm thinks you're prey. Time to show them they're wrong." She pulled up a star map in the command center. It showed dozens of systems the swarm had conquered, their positions marked in red. "We don't have the forces to take all of these back, but we don't need to. We need to make the swarm bleed. We need to make them afraid." "The swarm does not feel fear," Krell objected. "Everything fears when you hurt it enough," a human sergeant said quietly. "Trust us on that." Chen outlined her plan. Hit-and-run raids on swarm-occupied systems, not to recapture them, but to destroy swarm infrastructure. Supply depots, communication nodes, breeding facilities. Make every system they occupied a liability instead of an asset. "We will use human tactics," Chen explained. "Guerrilla warfare, sabotage, assassination of key hive nodes. We'll make them spread their forces thin, trying to defend what they've taken. Then we hit their main battle groups when they're weakened." It was a radical departure from Coalition doctrine. Aliens were failing the war. Then the humans arrived. 3 months after the battle at Praxis 7, the war had changed beyond recognition. The swarm still controlled hundreds of systems, but they no longer advanced with unstoppable momentum. Instead, they were bleeding from thousands of cuts, their attention divided across dozens of fronts, never knowing where the next attack would come from. Captain Senna led an Etheri strike team through the ruins of what had once been a thriving colony world. The swarm had stripped it bare 2 years ago, leaving only barren rock and the skeletal remains of cities. Now the swarm used it as a staging ground, growing bioships in massive organic vats scattered across the planet's surface. Senna's team moved silently through the darkness, their movements trained by human instructors. 6 months ago, the idea of Etheri conducting ground operations would have been laughable. They were telepaths and scholars, not warriors, but war had a way of changing species. Senna had killed her first swarm creature with a knife at Praxis 7. Now she had lost count of how many she had killed. "Target in sight," whispered Kree, her second in command. They crouched behind rubble, observing a massive biovat that pulsed with organic growth. Inside, a new swarm battleship was developing, its structure visible through the translucent membrane. "Rodriguez, we are in position," Senna said quietly into her communicator. "Copy that," came the reply from orbit. "Standing by for your signal." Human advisors had taught the coalition forces a new way of warfare. It was not about honorable battle or clean victories. It was about hurting the enemy faster than they could recover. Destroy their ability to make war, and eventually they would stop making it. Senna's team planted demolition charges around the biovat support structure. The explosives were coalition technology, but configured to human specifications, massive overkill designed to not just destroy but obliterate. When they were done, they retreated to a safe distance. "Fire in the hole," Senna transmitted. The explosion turned night into day. The biovat ruptured, spilling half-formed organic matter across the landscape. The developing battleship died before it could even be born. Swarm defenders rushed toward the destruction, but Senna's team was already gone, moving to the next target. This scene repeated itself across 100 worlds. Human and coalition forces working together, striking swarm facilities and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. The swarm tried to adapt, increasing security and spreading forces to protect their assets. That was exactly what the humans wanted. "Make them defend everything," General Chen had said. "When they're defending everything, they're strong nowhere." In orbit, above another swarm-occupied world, Commander Thelris coordinated a different kind of operation. 3 coalition cruisers and 2 human destroyers faced off against a swarm defense fleet. The traditional response would be a frontal assault, energy weapons blazing. Instead, they tried something different. The human destroyers broke formation and charged directly at the swarm fleet, firing kinetic weapons and what appeared to be nuclear missiles. The swarm moved to intercept, recognizing the threat. Their bioships swarmed the human vessels, seeking to overwhelm them with numbers. That was when the coalition cruisers struck. Not at the swarm fleet, but at the planet below. They deployed thousands of small pods that rained down on the surface. Each pod contained a virus designed by human and Quartzan scientists working together. The virus attacked the organic structures the swarm used for coordination and communication. Within minutes, the swarm fleet lost cohesion. Bioships began operating independently instead of as a coordinated whole. The human destroyers broke off their attack, having never intended to actually engage. They had been bait, drawing swarm forces away from the planet. Now, with the ground facilities compromised, the entire system was vulnerable. "All ships, weapons free," Thelris commanded. "Target the disrupted vessels." The coalition cruisers opened fire with energy weapons, targeting confused swarm ships that could no longer coordinate their defenses. The battle was over in 20 minutes. The swarm lost a dozen bioships. The coalition lost nothing. "Textbook execution," a human tactical officer commented. "Deception, misdirection, and striking where they're weak. You're learning." Thelris felt a strange mixture of pride and shame. Pride in the victory, shame that it required such deceitful tactics. But he was learning that survival mattered more than honor. The transformation of coalition military forces was remarkable. The Kelvar, with their 3 eyes and amphibious biology, became experts in boarding actions and underwater operations on swarm worlds. The Quartzan learned to use their crystalline bodies as weapons, reflecting and amplifying energy attacks in ways that confused swarm adaptations. The massive Gorath discovered that their 4 arms made them exceptional at operating multiple weapon systems simultaneously. But the most important change was psychological. Coalition forces stopped fighting to win cleanly and started fighting to survive. They learned to be ruthless, to take risks, to accept casualties as the price of victory. It went against everything their civilizations had taught them. But the humans insisted that nice people did not win wars against genocidal hive minds. Training facilities on coalition worlds became boot camps run by human drill sergeants who showed no mercy. Young recruits who had never experienced hardship learned what it meant to push beyond their limits. Species that had never known violence learned to kill efficiently and without hesitation. "You are not soldiers yet," a human sergeant told a group of Etheri trainees. "Soldiers are made through blood and fire. Right now, you are just meat waiting to be processed by the swarm. I am here to turn you into nightmares that the swarm will fear." The training was brutal. Many washed out, unable to handle the physical and psychological demands. But those who completed it emerged changed. They moved differently, thought differently, fought differently. They were still Etheri or Kelvar, or Quartzan, but they had learned to think like humans, like survivors. Meanwhile, human and coalition scientists worked together on new weapons and strategies. The Quartzan provided advanced material science. The Etheri contributed psionic technology. The humans added tactical creativity and a willingness to try anything, no matter how crazy it seemed. They developed biological weapons that targeted specific swarm genetic markers. They created computer viruses that corrupted the swarm's organic neural networks. They built psychological warfare tools that broadcast signals designed to confuse and disorient the hive mind. Every idea was tested, refined, and deployed. The swarm adapted to each new weapon, but now the coalition adapted faster. They would use a tactic once or twice, then abandon it before the swarm fully countered it. Keep moving, keep changing. Never let the enemy predict your next move. Pure human doctrine, adopted across the coalition military. General Chen stood before the coalition High Council, presenting the results of 6 months of joint operations. The holographic display showed recovered territory marked in blue, pushing back against the red of swarm occupation. "We have retaken 18 systems and successfully raided 67 swarm facilities," Chen reported. "Swarm advance has stopped completely. In some sectors, they are actually withdrawing forces to reinforce vulnerable positions." "At what cost?" demanded a Gorath counselor. "Your tactics have resulted in casualty rates 3 times higher than our traditional methods." "My tactics have resulted in us winning," Chen replied bluntly. "Before humans arrived, you were losing dozens of worlds every month. Now you are taking them back. Yes, people are dying. That is what happens in war. But more people would die if we did nothing." High Counselor Vena raised her hand for silence. "General Chen is correct. The human way is brutal and costly, but it is effective. We have lost more soldiers in these months than in the previous 2 years combined, but we have also saved billions of civilians who would otherwise be dead. That is the mathematics of survival. We stand at a critical juncture," Chen continued. "The swarm is off balance. They expected continued easy conquest. Instead, they are facing organized resistance and taking losses they never anticipated. This is our opportunity to shift from defensive operations to a full offensive." She expanded the holographic map, highlighting a system deep in swarm-controlled space. "This is the Vorn cluster, what we believe is the swarm's primary breeding ground. Intelligence suggests this is where they produce new bioships and possibly where their central hive coordination exists. If we can strike here, we can cripple their ability to wage war." The council chamber erupted in argument. The Vorn cluster was hundreds of light years into enemy territory, surrounded by dozens of swarm-controlled systems. Any attack would require committing most of the coalition's available forces. If it failed, the war would be lost. "It is too risky," argued Admiral Krell. "We would be betting everything on a single operation." "We are betting everything anyway," Thelris said, standing. "If we continue as we are, the war will last decades. We will win systems slowly while losing thousands of soldiers. The swarm will adapt eventually. This war ends with a bold stroke or it does not end at all." "Commander Thelris speaks wisdom," Vena said. "The humans have taught us that sometimes survival requires gambling everything. I vote to authorize Operation Deathblow." Aliens were failing the war. Then the humans arrived. The Vorn cluster hung in space like a diseased wound, 7 planets orbiting a dying red star. Every world was covered in organic structures, massive hive cities that pulsed with life and produced the bioships that had nearly destroyed the coalition. Sensors showed thousands of swarm vessels in the system, far more than intelligence had predicted. "Well," General Chen said, studying the tactical display on the flagship's bridge, I guess they knew we were coming. The Coalition fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the system's edge, 400 warships against an enemy force that outnumbered them 3-1. Traditional military doctrine said this was suicide. The humans had taught the Coalition that sometimes you had to do the impossible to survive. All ships execute Plan Delta, Chen ordered. Make them think we are retreating. The Coalition fleet turned away from the Vorn cluster and began moving toward the system's outer edge, firing as they went. It looked like a fighting retreat, a failed assault turning into desperate escape. The swarm took the bait. Thousands of bioships surged forward, seeking to annihilate the Coalition fleet while it was vulnerable. The swarm had learned many things about fighting humans. They had adapted to kinetic weapons, chemical attacks, and biological warfare. But they had not learned the most important lesson. Humans were liars. They were very good at it. As the swarm fleet chased the retreating Coalition forces, small human stealth ships emerged from hiding places among asteroids and debris. These ships had been planted days earlier, waiting silently with all systems powered down. Now they activated and began their real mission. Each stealth ship carried a single weapon, a modified nuclear device calibrated to emit radiation in frequencies that disrupted swarm organic systems. The humans called them bionukes. The Coalition had argued they were too dangerous, too indiscriminate. The humans had built them anyway. Detonate, Chen ordered. 20 nuclear explosions bloomed throughout the swarm fleet. The radiation did not destroy the bioships, but it did something worse. It severed their connection to the hive mind. Thousands of swarm vessels suddenly lost coordination, their crews operating independently without the guiding intelligence of the collective. All ships, turn and engage, Chen commanded. Target the confused vessels first. The Coalition fleet reversed course and charged back into the system. This time they had the advantage. Swarm ships that had been coordinating perfectly now bumped into each other, fired at friendly vessels, and failed to respond to threats. The Coalition forces cut through them like a blade through flesh, but the victory in space was just the opening move. The real target was the third planet, the largest hive world where intelligence suggested the swarm's central coordination existed. Colonel Webb's ground forces launched toward it in thousands of drop pods, protected by fighter escorts and covering fire from the fleet. Thelris rode in the lead assault ship with Webb and his command staff. Through the viewports, he watched the planet grow larger. It looked diseased, covered in pulsing organic matter that had consumed every trace of the world that existed before the swarm arrived. 2 minutes to drop, the pilot announced. Webb checked his rifle one last time. Around him, human and Coalition soldiers did the same. Etheri telepaths prepared their mental defenses. Kelvar warriors checked their aquatic combat gear. Quartz and shock troops tested their crystalline weapons. This was the most diverse military force in galactic history, united by a single desperate goal. The drop pods hit the atmosphere like meteors, burning through layers of organic material that the swarm had spread through the air itself. Swarm defense systems tried to shoot them down, but there were too many targets. Most pods made it through. Many did not. Thelris tried not to think about the soldiers who died in those burning pods. Their lives ended before they could even fight. His pod slammed into the ground hard enough to crack his head against the restraints. The doors blew open and he stumbled out into hell. The hive world's surface was a nightmare landscape of organic structures, pulsing membranes, and creatures that defied description. Swarm warriors were already rushing toward the landing zones. "Defensive perimeter," Webb shouted.
"Heavy weapons, give them something to think about."
Human soldiers deployed heavy machine guns and began firing. The sound was deafening after the relative quiet of the drop. Coalition forces added their energy weapons, creating a wall of fire that shredded the first wave of swarm attackers. But more were coming, always more. "Senna, take your team and locate the primary hive node," Webb ordered. "Everyone else, we need to hold this position for as long as it takes." Captain Senna and her Etheri strike team moved quickly through the chaos. They had trained for this, practicing infiltration techniques taught by human special forces. They used the confusion of battle to slip past swarm defenses, moving toward the massive structure at the planet's equator that sensors identified as a central coordination hub. The structure was enormous, a mountain of organic matter that pulsed with the thoughts of billions of swarm creatures. Approaching it felt like walking toward a living god. Senna reached out with her telepathic senses and immediately recoiled. The hive mind was vast beyond comprehension, a roaring ocean of alien consciousness. "We cannot destroy this," one of her team members said, his voice trembling. "It is too big, too powerful. We do not need to destroy it," Senna replied. "We just need to hurt it." They placed their explosives carefully, human-designed charges packed with biological agents that would poison the hive node's organic structure. It would not kill the hive mind, but it would damage its ability to coordinate forces across multiple star systems. That was enough. Back at the landing zone, the battle had become desperate. The swarm threw wave after wave of warriors at the coalition positions. Webb's forces held but barely. Bodies piled up on both sides. Ammunition ran low. Soldiers fought hand-to-hand when their weapons failed. Lieutenant Harris led a Kelvar unit in a counterattack that pushed the swarm back temporarily. The Kelvar fought with a ferocity that surprised even the humans, their three eyes giving them an advantage in tracking multiple enemies, while their aquatic-adapted muscles provided unexpected strength. "How long can we hold?" Thelris asked Webb, firing his rifle at a swarm warrior. "As long as we need to," Webb replied, reloading. "That is what soldiers do." Senna's team finished placing the explosives. They set timers and began their retreat, but swarm forces had discovered them. Warriors flooded the corridors of the hive structure, cutting off escape routes. Senna's team fought their way through, losing soldiers with every meter they gained. "Senna to Webb, charges are set, but we are trapped," she transmitted. "Detonating in 5 minutes whether we clear the blast zone or not." "Negative," Webb replied. "Abort the detonation. We will extract you." "No time," Senna said calmly. She could feel the hive mind pressing against her mental defenses, trying to understand these strange creatures that dared attack it. "Complete the mission, Colonel. That is what you taught us." Webb cursed in several human languages. He knew she was right. The mission was more important than any individual life. That was the hard lesson humans had been teaching the Coalition for months. But knowing it and accepting it were different things. "Confirmed," Webb said finally. "Thank you for your service, Captain. You will be remembered." Senna smiled, still fighting as swarm warriors closed in on her position. "Tell my people I died as a soldier?" That would have seemed impossible a year ago. The timer reached 0. The explosives detonated deep inside the hive structure, releasing biological agents that spread like wildfire through the organic systems. The hive mind screamed, a psychic howl that every telepathic species in the system could feel. It was not death but agony, the central coordination node collapsing into chaos. Across the planet, swarm forces lost cohesion. The hive mind still existed but could no longer coordinate its billions of bodies. They fought on instinct now, each creature acting independently. That made them vulnerable. "All units advance," Webb ordered. "Take this world while they are confused." Coalition forces pushed forward, supported by orbital bombardment from the fleet. They destroyed biofactories, breeding facilities, and coordination nodes. The swarm fought back, but without organized resistance, they were simply targets. The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, the Vorn cluster's primary hive world was a smoking ruin. The swarm had lost their breeding ground and their coordination center. Without these, their ability to wage war was crippled. The cost was staggering. 200 ships destroyed, 70,000 soldiers dead, including Captain Senna and her entire team. Every surviving soldier bore wounds, physical or mental. But the swarm had been broken. General Chen stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the tactical display as swarm forces throughout the galaxy began to retreat. Without central coordination, local hive minds were making their own decisions. Most chose to flee rather than continue a war they could no longer win. "Status report," Chen requested. "Swarm forces withdrawing from 80% of occupied systems," the tactical officer reported. "Remaining forces are disorganized and easily contained. The war is effectively over." The bridge crew cheered, but Chen did not join them. She thought about the 70,000 dead, the sacrifices made.